Hey everyone, so we finished here talking about volume of exercise. I wanted to go ahead and do a video lecture so we can move forward next week. So we talked about the product of frequency, intensity, and time. And again, I really tried to emphasize with y'all that I don't feel like there's a good way to quantify volume, particularly as interval training has become much more common and looking at total amount of aerobic exercise. So this was the example here with that HIIT training I did with the participant at Hope, assuming she did this 3 days a week. So if MET minutes aren't practical and steps don't take into account intensity, how do we actually quantify and measure volume? It's easier in some sports and activities. So for example, next week when we cover resistance training, it's pretty easy. You're looking at your weight times your reps times your set. This is one example that I'll give. Again, it's not covered in your ACSM book, but one way to look at volume is to assess RPE. So going back to that perceived intensity and multiplying that times your workout time. Okay, so again, what's a bit challenging with this is that maybe your RPE varied throughout your workout, particularly with interval training, but you would have your client or your participant or patient give you an RPE for the overall feeling of that exercise. So for this one, on a 1 to 10 scale, this person gave you an 8. They did it for 21 minutes. So their total volume for this exercise bout was 168. Okay, there's really no units for this because I guess you could call it RPE minutes. But again, this is just a way to kind of quantify volume. If they did this 3 days a week, their total volume for the week would be 504. So the idea with volume is that you need to have pretty much the right zone. Like we talked about with the SAID principle, if you don't have the right dosage to elicit the changes, it's not the right intensity, it's not the right frequency or duration, you're not going to see those changes again, whether that's from a rehab perspective or improving somebody's sport performance. So this is the Goldilocks zone. This is you're above the minimum effective dose. So again, the person's doing their workouts here, but it's not dosed correctly. This is kind of your sweet spot, or you have this maximum recoverable volume. So once we get over here into the red zone, it might be such a high volume that the person doesn't recover, and that's actually decrements in performance. So this maximum recoverable volume is the point at which kind of here in the orange zone where very high volume, still beneficial, but again, you don't want to come over here that your volume is so high that there's negative impacts like injury or detraining. So the rule of thumb with volume is around 10 to 15% increase per week. But again, if you're having a hard time measuring volume, it's hard to know what 10 to 15% is. So let's go back to this example of measuring RPE in time and frequency. That last volume from the previous slide was 504. So that's 8 RPE times 21 minutes times 3 days a week. If we are going to increase your volume by 15%, that would be up to 580. So what I was going to have y'all work on in class, but I'll go through the example here, is what various combinations manipulating the intensity, the time, and the frequency could equal 580 or around 580. Okay, so that's your top point. You wouldn't want them doing a volume of 750 if their previous, max volume was around 500. Okay, that's you're kind of covering into this zone that's too high. Again, if you know that, around 500 is helping them progress towards their goals, you may have a lighter week or a lighter workout, but if you're down here in the 300 range, that may not be effective. So if you wanted to increase their intensity to an RPE of 9 on a 1 to 10 scale, again, relationship between intensity and time, they're probably going to be doing a less time. So instead of 21 minutes, it went down to 15 minutes, and you can backwards do the math and say they'd need to do around 4 workouts to be around 540. So again, this is in between, 500 and 580. So this is maybe about a 7.5% increase. Okay. If they said, hey, I'm a bit fatigued, I don't want to work at a high intensity, or that's what you determine is best for your athlete or your patient, maybe you're dropping the intensity down to 7. Subsequently, you're probably going to have to increase the total time, or you can change the workouts. Okay, so what you could do is an RPE of 7. You could do it for a longer duration and do one workout. But again, really, you're probably trying to do, multiple workouts a week, particularly with aerobic exercise. Okay, so a couple ways to track volume and progress volume. That's our FIT VP, frequency, intensity, time, type, volume, and progression. So tracking volume 10 to 15% is a way to manipulate your progression. If we go back to this other example, calculating FIT with MET minutes, and again, I clicked on the link that showed you how ACE has an example of how that could be useful. 15% if you do 1,000 MET minutes is 150. So again, you could do various combinations of frequency, intensity, and time to equal that. So if they did 5 days a week at 30 minutes, they'd be at around 7.5 METs, which is 27 mLs per kg per minute. You could decrease your frequency, increase your time, and your MET stays about the same. Or you could decrease your frequency as compared to 5, keep the time the same, and you really have to up the intensity to be equivalent to around 1150. Okay, so this link, the PA Compendium, is going to show you MET outputs for different activities. So for example, I think running is one that's people can relate to the most. So if we're looking at around 13 METs, you're looking at running about 8 miles per hour, about a 7.5 minute mile. Okay, so that would be that last bout. Okay, so in summary for this aerobic exercise prescription lecture, no FIT VP. That was one of the very first slides. I didn't cover as much frequency. We focus on intensity and volume. I think those are the two hardest to prescribe. Understand and apply the SAID principle. So specific adaptations to imposed dosage, and review that from a previous slide. Make sure you can quantify intensity. Again, there's different methods, whatever is going to be appropriate for the person that you're working with. And then again, we will practice this, but designing your exercise prescription to progressively manipulate volume. Okay, and again, you might choose to measure volume in a number of different ways, but those are two examples I gave with MET minutes and looking at RPE in relation to your workout bouts and your time of exercise. Okay, so review this stuff. This will be on your quiz, and next week we will cover muscular fitness prescription.